batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
At the time Batman was made, you have to understand, it was so far ahead of its time. Nobody had ever seen anything like that.
That first night when I watched that very first episode of Batman, it was just like a nuclear explosion in my brain.
To the Batmobile.
I was 9 years old when Batman debuted. This was my world of characters come to life visually.
I didn't realize the show was meant to be a spoof or anything. I just took it straight.
The subtleties of Batman 66 just flew over my head. But all I knew as a kid is that I was attracted to the action, the color, the fights.
I remember the exciting opening theme, the exciting song, and the adventures with Batman and the cliffhanger ending and the Batmobile and all the trappings of the Batcave, and you just couldn't help but to get all caught up in the excitement of the world that was created.
When Batman came along, what it did was it gave people comedy and fantasy. It gave people a little bit of grit and a little bit of detective stuff and superhero element all kind of put into one.
Holy explosion!
This is probably the most fanciful world that I had seen on television.
There was nothing else on like it at the time. 60s TV was kind of interesting. You had things like Star Trek and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. So there was a lot of kind of fantasy-oriented TV shows, even the sitcoms, like I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched. It was all kind of, it was all a little bit sci-fi, a little bit fantasy. But Batman was like the first show that literally embraced the whole specific superhero genre.
The archetypes that were super popular were cowboys, detectives, space explorers. So I think Batman kind of had a little bit of everything. You looked at his interplay with Commissioner Gordon and the police force, and he's very much a detective and a cop.
Sorry, citizen, police business. You better move along.
There were detective shows like Dragnet where the good guys catch the bad guys. And there were westerns on TV, which is good guys and bad guys. And that's what Batman is.
Good, even though it's sometimes sidetracked. Always, repeat, always triumphs over evil.
He was the hero. He was the guy that you wanted to have your birthday party based around.
A lot of people grew up watching Batman. Not watching Batman was a punishment for kids that didn't do their homework.
The show was written on two levels. The color and the pows and the bams and the zaps, the kids appreciated that. But the adults, they were really picking up on the subtleties of the show.
What she needs is a good slap on the wrist.
That's enough. You know I'm violently opposed to police brutality.
We took everything, played it seriously, and twisted it with lots of double meanings and lots of kind of things that went on, and as a result, everybody saw something different in it.
The older audience could look at that dialogue and all the puns and all the double entendres and so forth, and they could really get a chuckle out of it because some of the stuff on there was bordering on risque at times with Catwoman's dialogue.
We are two adult human beings, and we're both interested in the same thing.
Come on, you can't miss with words like that.
We do things that have a suggestive nature to it.
We obviously need each other, Batgirl.
It's not raunchy or dirty or anything like that, but it's suggestive, and it makes people's eyes open.
Alfred!
We say things that leave a little bit of a zinger,
She looks very pretty when she's asleep.
I thought you might eventually notice that. That single statement indicates to me the first oncoming thrust of manhood, old chum.
We found a way to get that edge, that just little bit of an edge that made it different so that kids, they took it so seriously. I want to be just like Batman and Robin. But the teenagers, they roared.
I'm entering Batman in the surfing championships.
Shall we go into the men's locker room and put on our baggies?
If you were a college kid during 1966 to 1970, you had to fight for a seat in the dorm, on Tuesday and Thursday nights.
It was broad. It spoke to everybody. You can't deny how monstrous a surprise hit the show was.
If you take a time machine back to 1966, you could stand outside the culture and realize that we were in an incredible moment of transition.
It's a dark time. And where were our heroes? Kennedy was dead. The Vietnam War was on. There was a civil rights movement. We had an Iron Curtain. We had survived just barely a Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a dark time in a lot of ways for America. It was splitting our culture in half between the youth generation and the establishment generation. There was an urgent need for heroes.
Oh, Batman and Robin, thank heaven you're here.
And Batman shows up at this time in primary colors. It was the right thing at the right moment. We needed Batman.
It's Batman!
We were able to take all of that and kind of weave it into the show. Mayor Lindsay of New York became Mayor Linseed in our show, just a little example.
There's an innocence, but also an awareness that something's going on in the world. And they're addressing it in rather offhanded manners, but you can sense that they're aware that the world is changing around them.
You're in the 60s. We're being told to duck and cover under our desks, with nuclear war being the danger. And everybody knows there's the president's hotline to Moscow. And suddenly you have the hotline in the Batcave, and you have a glowing red phone
Yes, Commissioner.
that Commissioner Gordon can be ringing on to summon Batman.
Yes, Commissioner.
The phone looks like it's hot. It looks like it's burning as Batman picks it up.
Yes?
There was definitely a questioning of authority. Batman was the square. The villains were often seemed cooler. They were made to seem hipper and cooler.
You shake a pretty mean cake, Batman.
And I think the villains represented the counterculture. They represented the colorful hippies, the wild and crazy pot-smoking hippies that had started to come into culture and freaked people out.
Flower children?
The flower children think we're cool, man, like we turn them on, you know?
Yes, please be gentle with your visitors, Commissioner. Although it may not be understood by more literal minds, in their own way, they're doing what they can to correct the world's woes with love and flowers.
I think at that time we were probably the most important thing, because our take on pop culture was seen by millions of people all over the world twice a week. We were on twice a week in color.
Reminded me a little bit when people first saw in The Wizard of Oz, when you landed in Oz and suddenly there was all this color. And with a lot of the television was black and white then, so when you had this Batman series come on, suddenly it was like the television set was alive with all this amazing color.
Batman's rogues gallery is probably the most colorful. You put those rogues on the screen and you have instant splashes of color.
It was so rare for a network show to be in color that they actually had a bumper at the beginning of Batman where they said, Batman in color.
I didn't have a color TV when I first saw it. We got a color TV so that I could watch Batman, because we had a neighbor who had a color TV and we would go and watch Batman at their house. And it was just too great. It was so amazing. Even my mother was like, this show is no good unless you have a color TV. And I'll never forget the first episode I saw in color in our house was a Mad Hatter episode where he stole Batman's cowl and turned it pink. I remember even at 8 years old thinking, how would I have known this was pink if I didn't have a color TV?
I don't think there's anything better in bringing into the color world than the 4-color comic books that people grew up on. Comic books, the coloring process was fairly simple back at the time. They really could only use the primary colors and black, and basically use different saturations of the different reds, yellows, and blues to create all the different secondary and tertiary colors. So at the end of the day, being able to take those bright primary colors and secondary colors and bring them to the screen, I think, was a real faithful adaptation of the comic books and made the shows really vibrant and again played up the whole idea that you were watching a comic book come to life.
Batman 66 was not just mimicking the comic book, but mimicking the mimicker of the comic books. Roy Lichtenstein was doing these paintings where he was literally painting a comic book panel and enlarging it and showing the sound effects.
What Lichtenstein did was bring the general, originally art world, and then the general public to an awareness factor of the value of comics and comic art.
Dozier's team looked at that phenomenon of what was going on, and they said, okay, so he's taking this from comics and he's making it cool, he's making it mainstream. How do we go full circle? How do we bring that back? And how do we take that pop art sensibility and bring that to this incarnation of comics and make it work in a non-print medium? And they used the sound effects, they used the cartoon style title, all those visual elements to bring you into it, and then brought it to life with the color and the costuming and the production design.
The sound effects appearing on your screen when somebody got punched was just such a great, in-your-face, obvious comic book thing that even if you had never read a comic book before, you felt like you were in a comic book.
You're watching live actors and then suddenly the picture becomes flat because it becomes a comic book panel with the pow and the wham and the graphic nature of what's happening with the words popping on screen.
We were able to use all of the balloons, you know, the comic zaps and screech.
Bing, bang, and smash, pow, zap, wham.
And bar room and those things. And do it in a way and with timing that paid tribute to the comic books. But on the other hand, it enhanced the visuals of what we were doing.
You also couldn't see some of the fakeness of the fights if it was covered up by a big word.
The graphics sort of seduce you into thinking you're seeing more action than you're actually seeing.
Opening was really cool. That pan of the villains, you know, approaching the dynamic duo, and it's like there's no animation on it. They're just sliding through the scene. But it was a really cool drawing.
I was always disappointed that really you could only recognize the Joker. Oh, I guess Catwoman, you can recognize her too. And I always wanted to see some of those other guys show up on the show. What villain were they?
My first real interaction with comic book art was the Batman 66 main title. The idea of the animation, even though limited, you know, Batman and Robin running right towards you.
I still kind of try to emulate that pose, the straight-on shot where they're kind of running at you straight on.
That opening animation evoked Bob Kane and Jerry Robinson artwork from the comic books. It helped you fall into this world and take the ride with it.
They were diving into a world that had been visually developed over years by brilliant artists, guys like Dick Sprang, Carmine Infantino, who were great designers themselves and created fully realized fictional worlds in the Batcave. Even the look of Gotham City had a personality of its own. And the production designers had the challenge of capturing that and making that come alive for television, which was a very new kind of challenge for them.
Even though they're real three-dimensional sets with real three-dimensional people in them, they all have to have the comic book look to them.
They tried to figure out how to take some things from the comics that ultimately went back to film noir, so it came full circle through the comics back to the film medium that way.
Batman comics were known for very forced perspective. So they'd take a set and then, you know, something was going back into perspective. So they would actually build it so that it looked like it was getting smaller in the distance.
They used painted backdrops of buildings, especially the scenes where they're climbing the side of the building.
The Batcave alone is just a phenomenal set.
What a base of operations.
Yeah, it's a nice little pad, Cat Baby.
It was awesome to see every episode, a room big enough to have a car drive into it and have a nuclear reactor in the background and have bat computers and bat everything.
They made everything bat this, bat spray, bat tweezers, bat ray gun. Like, why? It's almost like he has to remind himself, like, I am Batman and I have to have everything reflect that.
When you have a character that has a very strong theme to him, especially with the villains, the entire environment takes on the theme of that villain. You see what the Egghead would be like, different from the Riddler's world, different from the Joker's world. Each one takes on a very, very unique style and sensibility.
The set has to reflect, the personality of the character. His enemies' lairs are stylized to reflect their irrational behavior. So that irrationality is reflected in what's around them.
The villains' hideouts are always really, really super cool. They always have, they always shoot the villains' hideout from a Dutch angle, so everything's always kind of tilted.
Many people say, well, it looks like a comic book. If you look at the Batman comics at the time, they were all straight on. They didn't have the crazy angles and so forth. That was something that was developed for the show by the creators of the show because they wanted to show that these characters were kind of off-kilter, that there was something a little odd in their world.
The costume designer, they're going to want to know everything that's going on in art, in the comic books, as well as the popular culture, and primarily what's happening with young people. Remember, we're beginning a revolution in 1966. We have moved into a new era, so they're going to be looking at that culture and try to make the costumes reflect what's going on in the kids' world.
Holy rising hemlines.
That was the beginning of the mod period. The clothes went from being like flowery and lacy and more super feminine to being more abstract, more geometric, more solid colors.
You're far from mod, Robin.
We emerged at a time of the designers doing haute couture. And, that was very colorful, somewhat bizarre, and it still is.
Gosh, what marvelous threads!
Batman, Superman, they all began with the strong man from the circus. Hence, we've got those tights.
The tights were the very heavy danskin tights, the thickest ones. And I think one of the wardrobe men thought that he wanted to make it a certain shade of gray, different than what it was. So what did he do? He dyed them. So whatever little bit of air you might have had in those tights, when you dye all those fabrics closed up like this.
Burt was always calling for the wardrobe man to straighten his tights out. Doing every shot, wardrobe, you don't think it's straighten the tights out. The makeup man, he was very particular about that, Burt.
It took two guys to put this costume on me.
Golly, Batman.
It just represents such another era. We would never even think of putting a man in a pair of tights today. It would be silkscreen fabric that had, it was a new, invented, fused fabric. It would be so exotic and fantastic and have such great influence on other fabrics to be developed, where this was a pair of dancer tights that they were putting on.
Let the costume work for you. It certainly did for me.
Do you imagine, where do these costumes come from? They made the costumes. You don't want it to look like there's another hand. You want it to look like the Catwoman. She designed her costume.
Julie Newmar, when she decided she was going to cock her belt a little bit off her hips and not just have it be on her waist, and that she was going to be slinky in how she dealt with Batman, that was great.
Hello, Batman.
The costume is just a second skin for the Catwoman. Those women know their attributes, and so they use that second skin to show it to its best.
Let no one say that Catwoman is not the best-dressed woman in the world.
The three good things about the Catwoman costume. Number one is black. That takes 10 pounds off you right there. It's tight, and you're wearing heels, which makes your legs look longer. What could be better? Someone once said it was like melted licorice poured over me. I don't know.
I'm flattered that your committee should be interested in me as a presidential candidate for 1968. But I'm afraid my Gotham City duties take precedence.
Massive numbers of people bonded and had the same experiences in the culture because there were only a few choices in terms of what everybody watched. So the next day, most people were talking about the same thing.
Hold it. This could be a death trap.
ABC did two-part episodes rather than a one-hour show. They did two-part episodes in the middle of the week, so you watched the first half on one night, then there was a cliffhanger, second half on the next night. Kids would watch one episode in midweek, and they'd go to school the next day and talk about how are Batman and Robin, or Batman, Robin, and Batgirl in the third season, how are they going to get out of this peril, and what were they going to do?
There seemed to be an unspoken code to the way the death traps worked. They would always show Batman and Robin about to be killed, but they wouldn't actually show them, you know, boiled in oil or whatever. But there was this one episode where Batman and Robin were going to be eaten by a giant clam, of all things. But at the end of the cliffhanger, Robin got like inside the clam's mouth, and the clam closed his mouth on Robin's, you know, you saw his foot go inside the clam's mouth and the clam closed his mouth. And when I was a kid, I thought that was code for Robin just died. So the next day at school, literally all the kids at school were like going, "Did you watch Batman last night? Robin got killed. Robin was like eaten by a giant clam."
And when you're 7 years old, this Batman thing wasn't a joke. It was serious. Robin was really gonna get eaten by a clam, and I really was gonna worry about it until the next day. It was nerve-wracking to wait, and it just built the anticipation. It was a lot of fun.
It really actually was one of the first shows to kind of create appointment viewing.
You have to understand, when something is successful, people are drawn to it. And it wasn't just an audience drawn to it. It was religious organizations. It was psychologists, psychiatrists. It was everybody had a comment. It was hairdressers that were doing women's hair with a Batman-style hairdo. It was this all-encompassing kind of a thing where everybody was getting in on the act.
It was a huge hit. People people nowadays, if they weren't there, if they didn't live through it, they have no idea what it was like. It was as big in its day as something like Star Wars is now.
A lot of money was spent on this show. It was one of the most expensive shows on television at the time.
I don't know of anything else that took the country by such storm on television. I never dreamed when I was writing the show that it was creating this kind of an impact.
I thought, really, this is gonna get legs. I thought it would have lasted longer than just 3 years, and it lasted.
Batman appeared on the scene like a comet and flamed out, and that was the end.
It was sort of a dish that you can't eat a lot of. I mean, it sort of wears off.
I think it lost some of its luster. You know, the joke was over after 2 or 3 years. I think the public started to get a little bored with it.
I went through a period where I didn't like the show, and I mean, a lot of people from my generation will tell you that they loved it as a kid, and they got older and they started taking comics seriously. They go, "Oh no, that show's silly, or it's campy, or whatever," and so you'd kind of like shun it. You know, it's like, "Oh, that was when I was a kid."
I know around between 15 and 19, I kind of, that's kid stuff.
And then later on, you kind of go, "Oh no," you watch it again, you go, "No, it actually really is dang cool."
Its success and its uniqueness kind of turned people against it after a while. There were a lot of knockoffs, and for a while, everyone thought if you're going to do a superhero property, that's the way you do it.
For a long time, people in comic books really had a big chip on their shoulders. They hated any sort of press they got where the headline was pow, biff, wham, because that was what reporters constantly went back to. People within the industry really wanted comic books to be given more respect for the art form.
That Batman show was the thing that kind of ruined the public's perception of superheroes for decades.
He was the right Batman at that moment. As far as I'm concerned, was that the right Batman? Of course not. course not. No, Batman's dark, serious, creature of the night. He's scary. He's got scary villains, not clownish, over-the-top villains. They're homicidal maniacs.
It wouldn't be until the 80s, it wouldn't be until Frank Miller, where Batman had a chance to break out again. And we got the Tim Burton Batman.
Batman is a character that you can do all these different things with him. You can go as dark as Christopher Nolan did with the Dark Knight movies, or you can go as goofy as the Adam West Show. And weirdly enough, it all still works. It's all equally valid.
When they approached me to do Brave and the Bold, my idea coming into that was, if I were to make a Batman show, I'd want to make the show I thought I was seeing when I was watching Batman 66 as a kid.
It's good to have versions of Batman that kids can enjoy at that level and graduate eventually to the hotter stuff.
It just speaks to the appeal of a character like Batman, who is very mythological and really is part of this foundation, of pop culture now.
Batman can take any universe, any shape, any form, any transition, because he is mythological. In our pop culture, he has become mythological.
The fact that we are able to publish Batman 66 comics based on the actors and the sensibility of the show now is just awesome. It's like, that's the comic I want to write for. That's the comic I want to be involved in, because I got the TV show. I got it one way when I was a kid. I got it a different way when I was older, but I get it.
I'm doing an issue of the Batman 66 comic right now, and trying to remember the tone and the voice is an effort, because there's a very unique and singular tone to that show.
We've come a long way from the Prime Minister's exploding cake. Or have we?
The 1966 Batman show is what made Batman a massive part of the American culture. Without it, you don't get the Tim Burton Batman movies, you don't get the Chris Nolan Batman movies, and you probably don't have Batman surviving for the 75 years that he's been around.
Nowadays, we take superheroes for granted because, all of the big movies right now are all superhero movies. And I don't know if that would be the case if that Batman show hadn't been on in 1966, because it showed Hollywood that, hey, there's coin to be made here.
Batman 66, it's kind of the defining show for a lot of creative people.
Anybody who grew up in the 60s and got in the comic book business got in because of Batman.
Without overstating it, it literally changed my life. I mean, it set me on the path to kind of where I am now, making animated superhero cartoons for a living. So it all goes back to Adam West.
Who is the true Batman? Is it the guy from the comic books? Is it the guy from the '89 movie? From Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises? Is it the guy from the animated series? Is it the guy from the 66 television show? I think we all know in our hearts that the one true Batman is the Batman you first were introduced to, that you first met at age 12 or whatever, whether it was in the pages of a comic book, in a cartoon, in a movie, or in a TV show. That will always be your true Batman.